Two kids show up at a lonely boarding house, looking way too wise for their age, and they know secrets that could shatter a woman's whole world. Get ready, because their arrival uncovers a mystery that's been buried for 20 years. The two children stood perfectly still in front of the boarding house as if they had been waiting for hours. Their clothes were clean, their faces calm, but their eyes held something that didn't belong to children their age, a kind of knowing that made grown men uncomfortable. Eliza Harper towered above them from her porch, all 6 feet of her casting, a shadow that swallowed the twins whole. Everyone in town knew the rule. Eliza Harper helped no one. She hadn't opened her door to a stranger in 15 years. But these children weren't asking for food or shelter. They were asking for something else entirely. "We need to see the man with the silver watch," the boy said, his voice too steady for an 8-year-old. "The one who comes here when the moon is dark." Eliza's face went white. No one was supposed to know about him. No one even knew he existed. The girl stepped forward, and that's when Eliza saw it, the small leather pouch hanging from her neck. The same pouch she had seen 20 years ago in a place that was supposed to be forgotten forever. "How do you know about the watch?" Eliza whispered. The children looked at each other, and for just a moment, something passed between them that wasn't. Quite like normal siblings sharing a secret. It was something older, something that suggested they knew far more about Eliza Harper than she had ever told anyone. "Because," the girl said simply, "he's been waiting for us to find him." From the shadows of the old oak tree, Sterling McKinley watched it all unfold. He had been coming to this place for 2 decades, always on the same nights, always carrying the same silver watch. But he had never expected this. The children weren't lost. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. Eliza's hands trembled as she gripped the porch railing. 20 years since she had last seen that exact leather pouch with its distinctive beadwork that told a story only 3 people in the world could read. She had burned everything else from that time, thrown away every reminder, moved to this God-forsaken place specifically to forget. But here it was, hanging around the neck of a child who couldn't possibly know what it meant. The boy stepped closer, his small bare feet making no sound on the wooden steps. "You recognize it, don't you?" His voice carried a certainty that made Eliza's stomach turn. "You know what it means? I don't know what you're talking about." Eliza's voice came out harsher than she intended. "Now get off my property before I call the sheriff." But even as she said it, her eyes couldn't leave the pouch. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 eagles in flight woven in blue and white beads with a single red bead in the center. She had helped make that pouch, her young fingers working alongside. Another pair of hands, both of them laughing as they stitched the leather under a summer sky that now felt like a lifetime ago. The girl spoke for the first time. "She told us you would say that." Her voice was softer than her brother's, but carried the same unnerving confidence. "She said you would pretend not to remember, but she also said you would never forget the night of the red moon when the soldiers came." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. No one knew about that night, no one alive anyway. She had made sure of that. She had buried those memories so deep that sometimes she could almost convince herself they had happened to someone else entirely. "Who told you that?" The words came out as barely a whisper. The children exchanged that look again, and Eliza realized it wasn't the typical silent communication between twins. It was something else entirely. They were deciding whether to trust her with something, weighing her reaction, measuring her worthiness. From behind the oak tree, Sterling McKinley felt his pulse quicken. He had been coming to this boarding house every new moon for 2 decades, always carrying the silver watch, always hoping. He had never known exactly what he was waiting for, only that he would know it when he saw it. And now, watching Eliza's face drain of color as she stared at those children, he understood that whatever he had been waiting for had finally arrived. The boy reached into his small leather bag and pulled out something that made Eliza gasp audibly. It was a photograph, old and creased, showing two young women standing beside a horse. One of the women had long dark hair and wore traditional native clothing. The other was unmistakably a younger version of Eliza Harper. "She's alive," the girl said simply. "And she sent us to find you." The photograph fell from Eliza's fingers, fluttering to the porch like a wounded bird. She stumbled backward until her spine hit the doorframe, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The woman in that picture had been dead for 20 years. Eliza had watched her die, had held her hand as the life left her eyes, had buried her with her own hands in unmarked ground, where no one would ever find her. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Deep in her chest, something that had been frozen for 2 decades began to crack open. Hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had spent 20 years learning to live without it. The boy picked up the photograph and held it out to her again. "She lives in the valley beyond the red rocks where the river bends toward the mountains. She has been waiting for the man with the silver watch to come back, just like you have." "I haven't been waiting for anyone." The lie tasted bitter in Eliza's mouth. Every month when the new moon came, she found herself standing at this exact spot, on the porch, scanning the darkness for a figure that never appeared. Until tonight, Sterling McKinley stepped out from behind the oak tree, his boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves. The silver watch caught the moonlight as it swung from his vest pocket, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She had imagined this moment so many times that seeing him approach felt like stepping into a dream she had been having for 20 years. "Hello, Eliza?" His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by time and weather, but unmistakably his. "I told you I would come back." The children turned to face him, and something passed between the three of them that made Eliza feel like an outsider in her own memory. They knew each other. Somehow, these children and this man who had haunted her thoughts for 2 decades already knew each other. "You brought them," she said, and it wasn't a question. Sterling shook his head slowly. "They brought themselves. I've been coming here every month for 20 years carrying this watch, never knowing why. 3 days ago they found me camped by Miller's Creek. They told me it was time." The girl reached into her pouch and pulled out another object that made Eliza's knees go weak. It was a small silver locket, tarnished with age, hanging from a delicate chain. Eliza recognized it immediately because she had given it to her dearest friend as a goodbye gift on the last day they had spent together. "She wants you to come home," the girl said, holding the locket out toward Eliza. "Both of you. She says the soldiers are gone now. She says it's safe." Sterling moved closer, his hand instinctively reaching for the watch in his pocket. "The question is, Eliza, are you ready to face what we left behind?" But before Eliza could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the night air. Multiple horses moving fast, heading straight for the boarding house. Eliza's instincts kicked in before her mind could process the danger. She grabbed both children by their arms and pulled them toward the door. But Sterling was already moving, positioning himself between the approaching riders and the porch. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, a gesture so natural it spoke of years spent expecting trouble. "Get them inside," he said without taking his eyes off the trail. "Now." But the children didn't move. Instead, they stood perfectly still, listening to something in the rhythmic hoofbeats that the adults couldn't hear. The boy cocked his head, slightly, like he was deciphering a message hidden in the approaching thunder. "4 riders," the girl said calmly. 2 carrying rifles, 1 injured. They're not here for us." Sterling shot a sharp look at the children. "How do you know that?" Before either child could answer, the riders burst into the clearing. 3 men and 1 woman, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. The woman slumped forward in her saddle, one hand pressed against her shoulder where dark stains had soaked through her shirt. Blood. Fresh blood. The lead rider, a grizzled man with a gray beard, called out breathlessly, "We need shelter. She's been shot. We can pay." Eliza's mind raced. She had turned away countless travelers over the years, but something about the desperation in the man's voice made her hesitate. The wounded woman raised her head, and in the moonlight, Eliza could see she was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that belonged in a church pew, not fleeing through the night with blood on her clothes. "What happened?" Sterling stepped forward, his hand still near his weapon, but his voice carrying an authority that made the riders pull up short. "Bounty hunters!" the grizzled man spat. "Been tracking us for 3 days. She didn't do nothing wrong, but they don't care about right and wrong. They care about the price on her head." The wounded woman tried to sit straighter in her saddle. "They killed my brother," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Shot him down in cold blood because someone lied about what we supposedly did." Eliza felt something stir in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than sympathy. She knew what it was like to run from false accusations, to have your life destroyed by someone else's lies. 20 years ago, she had been the one bleeding and desperate, searching for someone willing to help when the whole world seemed to have turned against her. The boy tugged at Eliza's sleeve. "She's telling the truth," he said quietly. "And they're not alone. There are more riders coming. The bad ones, as if summoned by his words." The distant sound of more hoofbeats echoed through the night. Closer now, moving with purpose. The bounty hunters had found their trail. Sterling looked at Eliza, and in his eyes she saw the same question that had haunted them both for 20 years. When the moment came to choose between safety and doing what was right, which path would they take? Eliza made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Bring her inside." She turned to the wounded woman's companions. "Your horses in the barn, quick and quiet." Sterling caught her arm as she moved toward the door. "Eliza, you don't know what you're getting into. If those bounty hunters find them here, then we deal with it." Her voice carried a steel that hadn't been there 20 years ago. "I won't watch another innocent person die because I was too afraid to help." The children moved with startling efficiency. The boy leading the horses toward the barn while the girl helped guide the wounded woman into the boarding house. They worked, like they had done this before, anticipating needs and obstacles with an awareness that seemed impossible for their age. Inside, Eliza cleared the kitchen table and helped ease the wounded woman down. In the lamplight, she could see the extent of the injury. The bullet had passed through the shoulder cleanly, but the woman had lost a lot of blood. Her face was pale as winter snow. "What's your name?" Eliza asked as she gathered clean cloth and water. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." The woman's voice was weak but steady. "My brother and I. We were trying to get to California, start over. But someone told the law we robbed a bank in Colorado. We never even been to Colorado." Sterling positioned himself by the window watching the trail. "Bounty hunters don't usually care about truth," he said grimly. "They care about collecting." The girl appeared at Eliza's elbow with a small cloth bag. "These will help stop the bleeding," she said, pulling out dried herbs that Eliza didn't recognize. "And these will help with the pain." Eliza stared at the child. "Where did you learn about medicine?" "She taught us many things," the girl replied, beginning to prepare the herbs with practiced hands. "She said we would need to know how to help people." The grizzled man burst through the door. "They're coming, maybe 10 minutes out. We can see their torches through the trees." Sterling turned from the window. "How many? 6? Maybe 7. All armed. They've got dogs with them." Eliza's hands stilled over Sarah's wound. Dogs meant tracking. Dogs meant there would be no hiding, no waiting them out. The bounty hunters would search every building, every hiding place until they found what they were looking for. The boy appeared in the doorway, his young face serious. "There's another way," he said quietly, The old mine shaft behind the ridge. She showed it to us yesterday. It connects to the valley where she lives. Sterling and Eliza exchanged glances. The valley where the woman who was supposed to be dead had been waiting for 20 years. The same valley the children claimed to come from. "You're saying she planned this?" Sterling said slowly. "All of it?" The girl nodded. She said the time for hiding was over. She said it was time for all of us to come home. Outside, the sound of approaching horses grew louder, and with it the baying of tracking dogs that had caught a scent. Sterling helped Sarah to her feet, while Eliza gathered what supplies they could carry. The wounded woman could barely stand, but there was no choice. The sound of barking dogs was getting closer, and soon they would pick up the fresh scent trail leading directly to the boarding house. "Can you walk?" Sterling asked Sarah, supporting most of her weight. She nodded weakly. "I'll manage." The boy led them out the back door toward a path that seemed to disappear into solid rock. But as they got closer, Eliza could see it was actually a narrow opening, barely wide enough for one person, hidden behind a cluster of boulders that had been carefully arranged to look natural. "How did you find this?" Sterling asked the children. "She showed us," the girl replied. "Yesterday, when we arrived, she said we would need it tonight." The grizzled man who had introduced himself as Frank shook his head in amazement. "Your friend sure seems to know a lot about what's going to happen before it happens." As they squeezed through the opening, Eliza felt the weight of 20 years pressing down on her. The last time she had fled through hidden passages in the dark, running from men who wanted to destroy her life. She had been alone and terrified. This time felt different. This time she wasn't running away from something. She was running towards something she had never dared to hope for. The passage opened into a wider tunnel that showed signs of old mining equipment. Sterling ran his fingers along the wall, feeling the tool marks in the stone. "This is old. Really old. Someone spent years carving this." The boy held up a small lantern that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. She said her grandfather helped dig these tunnels during the first gold rush, before the soldiers came and took their land behind them. The sound of men shouting echoed through the night. The bounty hunters had reached the boarding house. Soon they would find the warm ashes in the fireplace, the blood stains on the kitchen table, the fresh tracks leading toward the rocks. Frank cursed under his breath. "They'll find the entrance. Those dogs will lead them right to it." But the girl shook her head calmly. "No, they won't." She prepared for that too, as if to prove her point. A distant, rumbling sound echoed through the tunnel. Not the sound of pursuit, but the sound of something heavy falling. Something blocking the entrance they had just come through. Sterling stopped walking. "What was that?" The boy turned back toward them, his young face serious in the lantern light. "She set charges 20 years ago when she first prepared this place. Small ones, just enough to seal the entrance if it was ever needed. She's been waiting all this time for the right moment to use them." Eliza felt her breath catch. She knew we would come this way. She knew exactly when we would need to escape. The tunnel began to slope upward, and fresh air touched their faces. Somewhere ahead was the valley the children had spoken of, the place where a woman who should have been dead had been waiting for 2 decades, the place where all the secrets of that terrible night 20 years ago might finally be revealed. But as they climbed toward the surface, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than a simple reunion. They emerged from the tunnel into a valley that took Eliza's breath away. Even in the moonlight, she could see it was exactly as she remembered from 20 years ago. The same river bend, the same red rock formations, the same stand of cottonwood trees where she and her dearest friend had spent countless afternoons planning a future that soldiers and lies had stolen from them. But it wasn't empty anymore. Scattered. Throughout the valley were small dwellings built in the traditional way with adobe and wood, smoke rising gently from their chimneys. People moved between the buildings, and as the group approached, faces turned toward them with expressions of recognition rather than surprise. The children ran ahead, calling out in a language Eliza didn't recognize, but somehow understood in her heart. An older woman emerged from the largest dwelling, and Eliza's legs nearly gave out beneath her. It was her, older, with silver threading, through her long, dark hair. But unmistakably, the woman Eliza had held as she died 20 years ago. The woman she had buried with her own hands. The woman whose death had driven Eliza to exile herself in a lonely boarding house, carrying guilt and grief that had never healed. "Hello, Eliza." The woman's voice was exactly as Eliza remembered it, warm and steady and full of life that should not have existed. "I told you I would find a way back to you." Sterling stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to the silver watch. "Anna, but how?" "We saw you." Anna smiled, the same gentle smile that had haunted both their dreams for 2 decades. "You saw what needed to be seen, what the soldiers needed to believe. Sometimes the only way to survive is to let the world think you're dead." Frank and his companions stared in confusion, but Eliza barely noticed them. Her entire world had narrowed to the impossible woman standing before her, the friend she had mourned for 20 years, the sister of her heart who had somehow found a way to cheat death itself. "The children," Eliza whispered. "Who are they?" Anna placed her hands on the twin shoulders, and suddenly the resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same calm confidence, the same uncanny ability to know things they shouldn't know. "They're mine," Anna said simply. "Born in this valley, raised with the stories of the people who had to leave everything behind to build something new. They've been waiting their whole lives to meet the woman who saved their mother's life by helping her disappear." Sarah, still weak from blood loss, looked around the valley in amazement. "This is all yours." Anna nodded. "This is what 20 years of careful planning can build when you have the right motivation. This is what freedom looks like when you're willing to fight for it." But Sterling was studying the positioning of the dwellings, the sight lines, the defensive advantages of the valley's natural walls. His face grew troubled. "Anna," he said slowly, "this isn't just a hidden community. This is a fortress." Anna led them into the largest dwelling, where a fire crackled warmly in the stone hearth. The walls were covered with maps, detailed drawings of the surrounding territory, and what looked like 20 years' worth of careful documentation. Sterling recognized some of the papers immediately. They were legal documents, land deeds, and official correspondence. "You've been building more than a community," Sterling said, his voice filled with understanding. "You've been building a case." Anna nodded, pulling out a thick folder from a wooden chest. 20 years ago, when those soldiers came for our land, when they accused our people of crimes we never committed, I realized that running away wasn't enough. Someone had to stay behind and gather proof. Someone had to document what really happened." Eliza sank into a chair, the weight of revelation pressing down on her. "But you were shot. I saw you fall. I felt you stop breathing. You felt what I needed you to feel," Anna said gently. "I learned that trick from my grandmother. How to slow your heartbeat, how to control your breathing until it's barely detectable. She taught me that sometimes the only way to survive is to become invisible." Frank, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "But why go through all that? Why make everyone think you were dead?" Anna spread the documents across the table. "Because dead people can't be arrested. Dead people can't be forced to testify, and dead people can spend 20 years gathering evidence without anyone trying to stop them." Sterling picked up one of the papers, his face growing pale as he read. "These are confessions. Signed confessions from the soldiers who were there that night." "Drunk soldiers talk," Anna said simply, "especially when they think no one important is listening. Over the years, I tracked down every man who was there. Some felt guilty enough to talk. Others I had to be more creative with." The children sat quietly by the fire. and Eliza realized they had heard these stories their entire lives. They had been raised knowing that their mother was not just building a community, but preparing for justice. The bounty hunters who are chasing Sarah. Anna continued, "They're working for the same man who ordered the attacks 20 years ago. Colonel Marcus Webb. He's been systematically eliminating anyone who might be able to testify against him." Sarah looked up sharply from where she had been resting. "Webb? Colonel Webb hired the men who killed my brother." Anna nodded grimly. "Your brother found some of the same evidence I've been collecting." Webb couldn't risk it becoming public. Sterling stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "So, this isn't about hiding anymore. This is about fighting back. The territorial governor is arriving in 3 days for the annual land review," Anna said. "I've arranged for him to receive a complete package of evidence, every document, every confession, every piece of proof that shows what really happened to our people." Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in 20 years. Hope mixed with purpose, grief transformed into determination. "But Webb won't let that happen," Sterling said. "If he finds out where you are—" Anna smiled, the same fearless smile Eliza remembered from their youth. "Then, it's a good thing we're ready for him." The confrontation came at dawn. Webb's men had found another way into the valley, circling around through the high passes, while the bounty hunters kept everyone focused on the sealed tunnel. But Anna had anticipated this too. 20 years of preparation had taught her to plan for every possibility. When Webb himself rode into the valley with a dozen armed men, he found not a helpless community of refugees, but a coordinated defense that had been decades in the making. Every resident knew their position. Every building had been designed with multiple escape routes, and every weapon had been carefully maintained and practiced with. Sterling stood beside Anna. As Webb approached, the silver watch finally returned to its rightful owner. It had been Anna's father's watch, a symbol of the time stolen from their people, and Sterling had carried it faithfully until the moment he could bring it home. "Anna, little bear!" Webb called out, his voice carrying the same arrogance it had 20 years ago. "You should have stayed dead. I should have done many things differently," Anna replied calmly. "But dying wasn't one of them." Webb's hand moved toward his weapon, but stopped when he noticed the lone rider approaching from the main trail. The territorial governor had arrived a day early, and with him came federal marshals who had already received copies of all the evidence Anna had spent 2 decades collecting. The battle that Webb had planned never happened. Instead, he found himself surrounded by law enforcement officers who had warrants for his arrest and the arrests of every man who had participated in the massacres 20 years ago. The confessions Anna had gathered, the documents she had preserved, and the testimony of survivors like Eliza and Sterling had built an unshakable case. Sarah watched from the porch as Webb was led away in chains, finally understanding that her brother's death had not been in vain. The evidence he had died trying to protect was part of something much larger, something that would ensure justice for countless victims. Eliza stood beside Anna as the sun rose fully over the valley, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and hope. 20 years of guilt and grief fell away like shed skin, replaced by something she had never expected to feel again. Peace. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. Anna smiled, watching her children play with the other valley residents, all of them free, to live openly for the first time in their lives. "Now we stop hiding. The governor has officially recognized our land rights. This valley belongs to us legally now, not just because we've been strong enough to defend it." Sterling joined them, his purpose finally fulfilled after 2 decades of carrying that watch and wondering why. "And the boarding house." Eliza considered. "This. I think it's time for it to become what it was always meant to be, a place where people can find shelter when they need it most. Frank and his companions decided to stay in the valley, adding their skills to the community that Anna had built. Sarah's wounds healed, and with them, her faith in justice in the twins grew up knowing that their mother had not just survived, but had transformed survival into something greater. They learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let the world forget, refuse to let injustice hide in darkness, and refuse to accept that some wrongs can never be made right. Webb died in prison 3 years later, and with him died the last remnant of the corruption that had destroyed so many lives. The valley thrived, becoming a beacon for others who needed proof that it was possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these.